Hi, and welcome back to the Nook. Can you tell that I'm really excited to be back? Please forgive me if this video doesn't turn out great because one, I haven't been reading a lot. Actually, no, I have been reading a lot. But two, I have not been editing my face for the longest time. And I would say the hardest thing about doing content creating for myself at least is having to look at my face. Like I have to see my face and I have to see all these blemishes on my face. If I edit myself and then I see my face just like that, it just makes me feel like I'm not real. But anyway, let's catch up a little bit. Today I want to do a mid-year book kind of a wrap up, but also just talking you through different stages of my life. For me, reading is a very personal thing, and I've made it public by talking about it online, but it is still a very personal thing for me. I kind of see it as like journaling in a way because the books that I pick are the books that I'm interested in and are the books that I want to learn from, right? So ultimately, there is some kind of correlation between things I'm doing and things I'm reading about. Before we begin on the books, I just want to share that recently I've had the absolute honor of moderating a panel between a few booksellers and also like bookish people in Singapore. That is for the bookshop.sg launch. So you can check out their website. I'll link it below. But also I'll put some pictures of the panel here. I find it so amazing that books have a place in society and they continue to persist and endure through the passion of all these book lovers. And I would say there is very little money in books. I'm not doing this for money. People write books. Maybe some of them want to write it for fame, but a lot of people write books because they want to just tell their story. People read books, you and me, I presume. We have this currency of books that we just exchange and we love, and money is just a secondary thing when it comes to exchanging books. But of course there are very real issues when it comes to making sure that people who work in this industry are well paid, making sure that there is value tied to the books. And some of the things that we talked on the panel are also about how to make it sustainable in the long run to run a business of books, not just publishing but also the selling of books and then also the reading of books, and how that is all kind of in today's society, how that is being compromised, but also at the same time, how we can encourage it and grow it in our own local context. So that was really nice and it was really fun to do that panel. So thanks bookshop.sg for getting me on. But of course, we are here today to talk about books. So let's get into it. I'll have to put a disclaimer, like I definitely have books that I read that I share about. I would say that's about like half of the books that I read, but I do have like books on the other side of the other half that I keep for myself or that I read and it's not for public sharing. I don't know how to describe this. I guess one good example is that this year I'm part of the judging panel for the Singapore Book Awards that's organized by the Singapore Book Publishers Association. So I had to read, kind of like speed read over like 40 titles. But I don't really count that as me reading the books because I was judging them. And also a lot of these titles were not books that I would necessarily pick up by myself. So yeah, like I wouldn't really count those 40 books as books that I've read. Although of course that is a huge number and would definitely bump up my like yearly book number. What's that called? I am just gonna go in chronological order based off what I didn't share in my previous videos. So I'm not sure if I talked about this book. This is Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Koh. I would say Amanda Lee Koh is one of my favorite Singaporean writers. Her first collection of short stories, Ministry of Moral Panic, was one of the first Singaporean literature books-ish that I picked up, made me feel like I want to read more Singlit. Over the course of her writing career, I've always enjoyed the way that she writes. It's really colorful, it's really in your face, it's really deep in the description, it's very delicious. I don't know how to describe it, it's just very yummy, and its characters are equal parts variety show and equal parts like the saddest movie you've ever watched. I feel like she strikes such a good balance between something that's entertaining, but also something that's deeply contemplative, and something that makes you really wonder on which side you're on. And with this novel, when there's two sisters who are almost exactly the opposite, one is very, what we might call like very guai, like very obedient, very law abiding, very someone who really goes by human society, right? Really trying her best to keep things in order and in check. And then the other sister, who is a rebel, she's someone that is living multiple lives, testing the limits and the boundaries of human society. Oh, just for some context, this story is based on the tale of the two sister snakes. So this is quite a classic Chinese folk tale about the two snakes that become human. I would say this cover is so beautiful as well. The other cover is just like a hand, but I like this one more. I would say this book is quite like friendly in its approach, and for people who have never read her writing before, this is definitely a book that's very easy to pick up and finish. A lot of my friends who've never really read stuff before said that they raved about this. So if you're looking for at least one novel to pick up in the year, I think this is very, very easy to pick up and very fun to read. The next book that I read that I don't have now with me, but I do have a physical copy of it. I'm just put it here. Is Be Your Own Bay by Daryl Yam. Yam? Daryl Yam. If you notice like the books that I pick up, there's a certain trend to them. Yeah. I guess my relationship with Daryl Yam's work, every significant book that he's put out, I've read. I would say that I really enjoyed his later work, such as Shanti, 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 which I think has a reprint. So that's amazing. But Be Your Own Bay actually, I think, really solidifies his style for me, at least. It has this very fragmented points of view, and you follow very different characters through their life story. And I've noticed this as well in some of his earlier works, where he tends to really enjoy characters that are really quite broad, and especially like friendships that veer on a little bit of absurdism. I don't know whether it's absurdism to me, but it just feels very like in your head, and it touches a lot on young adulthood, trying to find your own way in life, and having to really reckon with the full force of love, relationships, family, and the world. I think there's a bit of existentialism in his writing as well. And I really, really enjoyed Be Your Own Bee. I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed it because the characters, I at first I felt they were quite juvenile. I was like, what are they doing? Why are they like loitering like this? But I think afterwards, slowly, I could really feel the conflicts, the tensions between the characters and the story. There's a little bit of a touch of like of something that's a suspension of belief in this line of characters. I think this is a book that really touches on this little moments of closeness between individuals that feel estranged from their lives and from the people around them. I would say if you're looking for something that's a bit more broody, this in between of trying so hard to make a life in a place that is so hard to make a life in, I think this book is for that. Yeah, and I really enjoyed reading it. Okay, the next book I read was pretty random. It's a book called Babel, by R.F. Kuang. Okay, that's the one I think you all know. I've heard a lot of things about R.F. Kuang. I've never read her works. And I know that there's a lot of people who either love R.F. Kuang or they hate R.F. Kuang. I say I understand both points. I understand both sides. Babel basically tells the story of this language tower, this tower of translation in which there's a touch of magic in it as well. Like when you translate words, there is magic that is created from this loss of meaning or from like this disjunction between words. So like obviously when you translate certain words into others, the meaning is not completely matched perfectly. So that disjunct is what gives that act like that magical essence. I think the concept of translation is very, very, very interesting to me. It's something that's very intriguing as someone who has grown up around several languages. I always find translation to be a deep well of doubt in the sense that it's very subjective. There's so many things in language that just cannot be matched perfectly onto the next. I think that's one of the greatest mysteries of like humanness, if I may say so myself, in the sense that we've created so many different languages to convey our thoughts. And I think that is what I wanted to see more in this novel. But I think what came across was a very simplified version of this whole decolonizing of language. I think that's what R.F. Kuang was trying to do, decolonize language, which is a very important thing to do when you are writing about books. And for me to be speaking English right now, when my mother tongue is Chinese and my family speaks in Bahasa Indonesia. So it's like, you know, this tension between the different languages that we inhabit and we live in. I felt like that could have been brought through more. In the end, the novel just felt like an action flick for teenagers. And I think in that sense, it's not a bad book. This book was just a blip in my timeline. I wouldn't really recommend it, but I can see why people are hyped about it if you have a certain context for it. Okay, we move on. The next book that I read, which I read as an ebook, is called Peripathetic: Notes on Unbelonging by Cher Tan. This is something that I do when I travel to other countries, is that I would search for books that were published in that country or had some kind of relevance to that country. And so I was on holiday to Australia and I found this book. I would say I kind of really enjoyed it. Cher Tan is someone that is very, very candid and very upfront. And I enjoyed that. She's very direct. Basically, the entire book is a bunch of her essays on different things in her life. Like it could be like working F&B jobs in Australia. It could be about how she was part of an indie music scene, about how she met her internet friends, made friends online, and also just about like her general understanding of language, also growing up with different languages, also now like being someone of color in Australia. She's someone that's so cool and edgy, and she put all of that into this book. And I think it's just quite refreshing to read essays by someone who is so against it in a way, who's someone who didn't really like coast along it so easily, like someone who had majored in creative writing and then ended up with like a book grant and then published like 3 books. I mean, this is someone who has lived her life and has done things and has been part of scenes, and is now doing this. You know, like I really appreciate that. I feel like that's something that's very down to earth, and I wish I could read more of, because I do feel that when we have, I mean, nothing against creative writing majors, but personally for me, I don't really identify as someone who writes or enjoys writing. And a lot of people always ask me this, like, you like to read so many books and you have a good command of language, why don't you write? And I'm like, but why would I write? Or like, why should I concern myself with like the proper ways of expressing myself? I think that's the spirit that I got in this book as well. And I kind of felt like a kindred spirit with this book. You know, I did feel a bit like, okay, I like how you can be against the grain and make your own life in your own way. You know, and also this thing really struck me is that, like, what if the country that you're born into is not the country for you? So for those of you who are interested in these themes, I guess, pick up this book and read it for yourself. It's kind of like just reading a friend's hot takes. And I think that's really nice. Okay, it seems like I'm on a memoir binge, because the next one that I read was Ayam Buah Keluak and the Art of Writing, a memoir on living creatively by Josephine Chia. Okay, Josephine Chia is someone that is very unapologetically herself, and has written a lot of books about being Peranakan in Singapore. And this book I really wanted to read because Ayam Buah Keluak is one of my favorite dishes ever. It's the dish that I eat when I finish my national exams. It's the dish that I eat when I am feeling very low. So when I saw it in the title, I was like, I have to read this book if that's important. Like, if it's part of the story, right? I would say it wasn't really part of the story. I kind of saw her intention through the book, but after a while, the book really started reading like a self-help book. At one point, she kept saying like, do yoga, which I'm like, yeah, I know yoga is great, but like almost every other page was like telling me to do yoga. I can't wholeheartedly recommend this book. In terms of what I would have wanted to see, it became more of a repeating self-helpy tone towards the end rather than really like letting the reader sit and marinate in the different moments of her life that are definitely very important learning points. So I wish there was a bit more of that pausing and stillness. But yeah, that's just my opinion. And yeah, do check out like Ayam Buah Keluak like around if you've never tried the food before. It's super yummy. You can also replace the chicken with tofu. Okay, next book that I read is Gaia's Web: How Digital Environmentalism Can Combat Climate Change, Restore Biodiversity, Cultivate Empathy, and Regenerate the Earth by Karen Baker. That's such a long subtitle. Actually, one of you recommended this book under my comments. It's a great book. What can I say? I knew about Karen Baker from one of the previous books that she wrote about bioacoustics. I think in that book she was primarily interested in how technology can help in understanding the natural world through like the extension of senses that humans cannot tap on. And ultimately the whole point of these technologies were to help humans understand the natural world without being intrusive, without having to trample into these areas, and to help to restore these ecosystems as much as possible. Now, Gaia's Web takes a very similar approach. It's really about understanding what technologies are existing that can help humans understand the environment, that's one, but also to have more non-intrusive ways to support ecosystem regeneration and health, and all these different things like biodiversity, etc. One of the most interesting things that I picked up from this book was the idea of data, and whether data was necessarily good in itself in trying to, again, protect the earth, right? And I would say like all around us, it's quite apparent that people are for data. You know, more data means good, right? Intrinsically, we all can sort of agree that it doesn't mean like more is better. It's just that we need more reference points, but it's also about what these reference points mean, and what is the quality of these data points. Data accumulation, analysis, and also all these sort of things also take energy to compute. Karen Baker actually had a whole chapter on AI. AI is both a good and bad in her books. I mean, for Karen Baker, she's very, very neutral. She talks a lot about what the good things are and what the bad things are, and in the end it's all about moderation and regulation. And I really appreciate that because she doesn't shy away from the good and the bad, you know? And she understands that it's specific contexts that really need to understand what parts of the technologies you need to deploy and how you can then make sure that they're not over extending beyond what they're supposed to deliver, and therefore like do harm. Like things like citizen science, is very well known that it helps scientists collect the data that they need. Flip side, it's like now we have so much noise, right? And actually a lot of this data that's collected can be hacked and used for bad. Monitoring systems for endangered animals were hacked by poachers who then used the data to find these animals. And the scary thing now is that like we can't really say no to technology. I guess the question is also how much can you say no to it. But in this case, I think one of the most immediate concerns is like how, if you're writing on it, then what are we doing with it? This is a theme that's continuing in the books I'm reading now. Like this is the I've always been interested in like in technology, but not in a pro-tech sort of way, but more in a okay, we have it, what we're going to do about it sort of way. I would say Gaia's Web is a really, really interesting read for those of you that don't mind a bit of a challenge in terms of nonfiction, and specifically the intersection between climate and technology. But really, it's very comprehensive. I feel like climate tech is such a booming thing now, but what really goes behind it and what is it really effective for? I think that's the question that a lot of people are scared to ask when it comes to technology. Like, is the tech really helping? Is the accumulation of data and the deployment of various intelligences and technologies, is it really helping? Moving on to my next book. It's called Deep Water, The World in the Ocean by James Bradley. Sorry, I'm like seeing the screen behind the camera. I started to read Deep Water because it's about the oceans, which I didn't really know a lot about actually. Deep Water is a book that's birthed by decades of immersion, I feel, by James Bradley. Reefs, beaches, things like the different animals that live in the ocean, also about human trafficking that happens in the oceans, or things like deep sea fishing, etc. Like these are very much like areas of knowledge about oceans. But I guess what stands out in this book that's not just a textbook, it's really the way that James Bradley talks about his personal memory with the different parts of the ocean. In this book, I could really see the love and awe for water, and I just love it when I can feel that love through a book. I always say this about books is that to me, reading a book feels like reading a person. It feels like you're reading years, of effort being put into a book. And in a sense, a book contains that spirit between Gaia's Web and this. Gaia's Web is a very, very informative, whereas this felt more like a memoir. Be prepared for some of these statistics. They're not nice. Bradley is not trying to be pretty about it. So yeah, just a bit of a warning, I guess. Like it's very real. And sometimes for me, when I live my day to day, I guess from very early on in my reading journey that's online, I did read a lot of a bit more alarmist kind of work. Sometimes I'm jolted back, I guess, by the books I read when it kind of paints the reality for me in this way. And every time I think about climate scientists and how they are facing dread every day, it kind of just really stuns me to my core. Like I'm just speechless. There's one part in this book where Bradley is like talking to the different scientists, and some of them just have so much hope. Why would they stay in a field, doing maybe like coral reef research? Why would they stay in such a field if they only feel despair, right? That's this book. It's really beautifully written, equal parts memory, science, kind of critical reflection of social political issues today as well. So if you like those three things, I think this book would be quite fun for you to read. Maybe not fun, thoughtful. Let's move on to the last book that I most recently finished. And I read this on my ebook. This is Waste Tide by Chen, Qiufan. So this time I was in Shanghai for a short bit. I think this novel is fantastic. I am dumbfounded by this novel. I feel like I couldn't sleep after this novel. I felt like something in my brain shifted because of this novel. I don't know whether that's high praise. I think it just speaks to how profound this novel is. Maybe it's because I've not read anything like it before, but so if you've read something like this before, I guess it wouldn't really stun you as much as it did stun me. Waste Tide is a novel that's set in the future. It's about this place called Silicon Isle, that is run by three clans. There are the locals, like the natives, and then there is a huge migrant population that does the dirty work. So in this future, there are a lot of artificial prosthetics and things like, biohacking things that people do. And there's a lot of waste that's being generated from this biohacking culture or something, and all of that needs to be recycled and processed, right? And recycling is a norm because there's no more new resources to take from, right? You have to kind of create things or manufacture things from recycling. There's this one person called Mimi. She's the central figure of the whole novel. It just feels so real. It feels like we are already hurtling towards that future. That the author is kind of extrapolating from where we are today, that things aren't really going to change. The story is really mostly about like how far can we push technological advancements of humankind, and how does that tie into our existing understandings of spirituality, and how we can differentiate between what is ourselves as in biologically and what's not ourselves, and can we even say no to that. Good stories are when you remember the characters and they kind of live in your head. And I'll say Mimi is living in my head right now. Like, Mimi is there. And I wouldn't say I'm a fan of science fiction, but stories like this really make me, wow, we really need to read stories. So yeah, I really recommend this novel. I really, really enjoyed it, and I want more of you to read it so we can talk about it together. You know, I can't just be talking about it by myself here. Thank you so much for sticking with me, for being here, like for spending your time listening to me. And for all of you who've come to me in person and told me that you've enjoyed my work, thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.